Welcome to another episode of the Plutus Awards podcast. Our community is filled with hundreds of stories from creators and entrepreneurs just like you. And through this podcast, we plan to share these stories from bloggers to podcasters, writers, speakers, and more. Let's meet today's guest.
Hey, my name is Gwen. I am the creator of Fiery Millennials, a blog for millennials on the path to financial independence. I started this blog about 5 years ago, and I started it because I was looking for somebody in the FIRE community who looked like me, who was a single young lady looking to get advice and find other like-minded people, and I didn't find anybody, so I became that person that I was looking for.
FIRE is a term that's being thrown around a lot right now, Gwen, like financial independence, retire early, if you haven't heard of this acronym before. I mean, this is something that you started to gravitate towards, right?
Absolutely. I found my first financial independence blog when I was in college in 2012, and it was actually Mr. Money Mustache's blog. Something just clicked when I read it, and I was like, yes, this is something that I want to do. So I graduated from college, and I dove headfirst into the world, and I started optimizing as much as I could in my budget, started saving as much as I could, and then I was like, oh, I don't see anybody out there like me. So that's when I started the blog, is to kind of track all of those changes and things that I was doing.
And what was the biggest thing that drew you in? I mean, because obviously, I think for most people, it's probably the freedom to kind of pull yourself away from traditional 9-to-5 work. But for you personally, what was it that kind of made you want to take on this lifestyle?
Well, it was kind of twofold. So first, it really jived well with my experience growing up with the lessons that my parents taught me, but kind of like taking everything one step further and listening to everybody on the internet, anonymous strangers, and not my parents, because who listens to their parents, right? Two, I started working full-time after college and was like, is this what the next 40 years of my life is going to look like? Like, I don't think I can handle this. Like, that just sounds terrible. So I started saving as much as I could in order to kind of give myself the freedom to choose what my working career looked like.
I think that happens to so many of us. I know that happened to me for sure. It's like you get that first like real job out of college and you're like, this sucks. This is not at all what I thought this was going to be.
What do you mean I can't take naps?
It's like, I got to come here every day? Come on. I mean, but it really is like a shock to your system, because I think you have these really kind of like big goals and dreams when you're in school. I mean, and it's different for everyone, but you have this image of what your life is going to be like. And I mean, really the reality of work is not, for most of us, what we think it's going to be when we're graduating college.
I did not imagine a lifetime of shuffling TPS reports around.
That sounds exciting. What are you talking about? That wasn't one of your dreams in elementary school?
Weird, but like, no.
Okay, so you find yourself in this job, pushing these TPS reports around, and you start looking into the FIRE movement. You get excited about it. What did that process look like for you? What was that journey like for you while you're working and while you're pursuing FIRE?
It basically looked like trying to figure out how to optimize my life to save as much as possible. That involved trying to figure out how I could max my 401k, my Roth IRA, my HSA, maybe putting a little extra money aside in savings to have as a cash buffer, or to put into a regular taxable investment account to save up for something like a house or something. I just cut back my expenses as much as possible. I had a roommate for a while. I brought my lunch to work every day and tried to cook in as much as possible. I invited friends over for potlucks and drinks around the fire pit in the backyard, and really just was kind of living my best life within the guidelines that had been set up by the FIRE bloggers that had come before me.
What was that goal for you? Where did you have an age already sitting out there in the distance that you saw yourself aiming for when you would be able to stop working?
When I first started, I had a goal that I was going to retire by the age of 35, which meant that I would have spent about 14 or so years, maybe 13, in the working world. And then I would walk away with money about $625,000 to my name. So it was kind of more of a lean fi situation, because I didn't earn a lot of money compared to some people. I started out my journey in the Midwest in a pretty low cost of area living. So I was getting really well compensated for that area, but I wasn't making anywhere near like six figures.
Some of the probably like prominent voices, some of them you'll see there, like they're software engineers somewhere maybe out here where I'm at, or in other parts of the country where it's like big tech hubs, and maybe they're bringing in $100,000-$200,000 a year, which makes the journey to save a lot easier.
Absolutely. I mean, there's only so much you can frugal out of your budget, but the options for earning more are basically unlimited.
You ended up giving the whole freelance work life and kind of like a semi-retirement a try, right?
I spent about 9 months in 2018 self-employed. This was predicated by the fact that I was dating a guy also in the fire community, long distance in Minneapolis. We wanted to be together, and it made more sense for me to leave my job and give the freelancing shindig a try. So I moved up there and tried to become this online influencer and blogger. And I had a podcast at that point with a friend, just try and see if I could make it on my own outside the working world. Spoilers, the answer was no.
It's tough. I mean, it's a huge shift from getting a steady paycheck to going to a point where all the income you're going to get has to be 100% generated by you. I mean, that couldn't have been an easy transition.
No, and in fact, it was really difficult, actually, because my career up at that point had been pretty response-driven. So if somebody called me and I did something, I use very reactive work style, whereas being a self-employed entrepreneur, it's very, very, very proactive. You really got to hustle and put that work in, and I just simply had no idea how to work like that, to be completely honest. I expected to put in the same amount of effort as in self-employment as I did working for somebody else. That's just simply not possible.
It's just a different world. And I mean, I give you a lot of credit for giving it a try, because I myself have not been brave enough to kind of jump in there, because it's a whole other level of hustle than it is going to work. I mean, not saying that we don't work hard when we're in a day job, but it's just different. It kind of never ends, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you feel like this immense amount of guilt every time you take a night off to go hang out with your friends. I had trouble starting to spend money because I was like, oh, my money's going down. I'm not used to drawing down money. I'm used to hoarding it and stockpiling it. I was just watching my money go down. So you become even, more of a hermit and socially isolated. And that just makes you feel even worse. It just really wasn't a great fit for me personally.
You spent your time kind of giving this a shot, seeing how this felt. Was the plan to continue to do this up until you hit that age that you had as your target date, or was it more so predicated on a dollar amount you hit?
That plan was more like a coast-fi kind of scheme, where I would have just kind of casually continued to work and bring in money, but not a whole lot. Basically, just allowing all of my investments up to that point to kind of continue to grow in the background until I hit the amount that I was comfortable with, and then I could have, scaled back on whatever I wanted. That was the plan, and it definitely didn't work out.
What was it that made you kind of take a look at everything and say, you know what, this isn't working, and maybe I need to try something different?
I pivoted about 3 or 4 different times. I was like, well, this isn't working. Let's try this. And then that didn't work out. So then I was like, well, I'm going to try this way to make money. None of them really just worked out. And I realized it wasn't because I wasn't putting in the effort, although that was a tiny part of that. I could have put in way more effort. But I realized that it just wasn't a good fit for me and my personality and who I am as a person. I'm a very people-y, pleasy person. I like helping people do their work. I'm in the background. I'm getting things organized. I'm there so your work goes smoother. That is really difficult to pull off in a freelance world where you're creating blog posts and you're doing podcast episodes. And it's like all of these things are talking about money. And I didn't have any money to play with anymore to write about. And so I was like, well, if I'm a money person who doesn't have any money to write about, then what am I doing?
And it's one of those things where you see these examples of individuals who are very successful and who have made these businesses and careers for themselves. But it's kind of like, just because they were able to do that doesn't mean that's going to be something that you enjoy. But it's a very enticing experience or lifestyle. I mean, when you look at it, it's like, this seems great, but maybe that's not a fit.
It looks fantastic on Instagram.
It really does. And it's like, it's one of those things where you don't really know until you're in it if this fits the way that you work and fits the way that you do things. Because I think it can be a specific type of person or personality that works well in that type of work environment. And you kind of have to know yourself and how you would feel and interact in that situation.
I feel like those with more of a type A mindset would thrive in that kind of situation, whereas that is not me at all. Yeah, I did not thrive at all.
Yeah, I completely understand. I think we have pretty similar personalities in that. For me, I'm like, I kind of like to have my routine. This is the things that I like to do. This is how I work. But I think that would stress me out like crazy, giving that a try.
There was a lot of other factors that involved making the decision to go back to work. That relationship that I moved to Minneapolis for wasn't working out either. I was very stressed out. I, at that time, also got into real estate and owned a triplex out of state. Being a long-distance landlord was very, very, very stressful for me. It wasn't in the best neighborhood. I was having trouble finding quality tenants. There were surprise repair bills that I had to pay that I didn't have the money for. And it was all this like ball of stress that just came down on me. And I realized that I just need to be true to myself and who I am. And who I am is a very happy W-2 employee.
And there's nothing wrong with that at all.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think the bit of advice that I found most helpful was somebody reached out to me right when I was starting. And they said, listen, there's no shame in going back to work for somebody else. If that's what works for you, then you do that. And you don't listen to anybody else. You do what's best for you.
Those are wise words. You don't know how this is going to impact you. You don't know what your experience is going to be. And I think, especially when someone's public, like you were living like a semi-public life. I mean, obviously you're not posting everything you're doing online, but people are aware of what you're doing. And I think sometimes it can be so hard to say you're going to do one thing and then decide this doesn't work for me, but people already are they already know what you're doing, right? I mean, they had to be play into the process a little bit for you.
And it is hard to say, like, hey, I failed miserably at this and I'm going back to work. But I didn't say that, obviously, because I didn't fail. I learned a lot of very valuable lessons about me and how I operate. If anything, it was a very cheap way to learn a lot about myself. 9 months off of work, is a pretty good deal. And I made it 9 whole months without a job. Like, that is really impressive and really quite difficult for, the average person to pull that off. I think it's all about how you frame it and how you spin it to people. I didn't fail at being self-employed. I learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work for me.
Exactly. Because like you said, I don't know personally many people. If I take away all my personal finance friends, if I take all those people out of the bucket, I don't know if I know anyone who could stop working for 9 months and not become homeless or starve. I think they're saying a lot that you put yourself in a position to give this a try. And the fact that you put yourself out there to have this experience, to learn about yourself, because I'm sure it would have been one of those questions that you always had in the back of your mind if you wouldn't have given it a try.
Absolutely. I don't have to wonder about what ifs anymore. I know. I don't have to beat myself up or, what if we lived together and I tried to move to a new city and what if we had done that and moved in together and see if it could have worked out? What if I had tried to make this full time and what I could have done without work in the way. But I don't have to wonder. I know exactly what happened. And that's very, very calming in the middle of the night when, your brain's looking for something to beat you up over.
Exactly. Those quiet moments when you have nothing to do but to think. You go over all the what ifs in your mind. And that's really cool that you were able to check that one off. I guess one of the things I like about the people who are pursuing financial independence is even if you don't get to that specific point where you're like, okay, I'm just going to retire at, 20 and live the next 80 years doing whatever I want. Even if that's not you, you're giving yourself flexibility and you're giving yourself options. You put yourself in a position where you can try things that you might not ever be able to if you're so tied down to all of these expenses that you've built up over time, or this job that you have no flexibility with. You've given yourself options to try new things and learn more about yourself.
And there's no real way to fail at financial independence. I mean, even if you don't manage to retire early, you still might have given yourself the option to even have a normal retirement, which is, again, more than some people can say. Maybe you didn't retire at 40, but you still retired at 50, which is way earlier than the average retirement age in America. There's no way to fail. Yeah, things might not have worked out the way you thought they did, but, they still worked out pretty good.
I mean, you still can't, at the end of the day, you'll be happy with the results, even if it's not what your initial goal was. You've decided to go back into the workforce now. What was that process like? Because what I'm interested in is you took the 9 months off, which means that you don't have work history for that 9-month period. What was it like jumping back into the labor force, labor market with that gap in your history? And, was it a little more difficult? Did you find it was about the same? Like what happened?
I found that I had the best results when I was completely honest about what had happened. I said I left my last job because I wanted to move in with my long distance boyfriend. It just didn't work out, and now I'm looking to get back in the career force. And most of the interviewers were like, "Wow, that is bold. Good on you to have that courage." I think that spoke positively about me and my mindset, and spoke volumes about, what I was willing to do and the risks that I was willing to take. But I found it a lot harder to get back into the workforce than I thought. I must have interviewed for 3 or 4 positions, and some of them made it to second round. Some of them were only first round. But I had forgotten a lot of the small details about my career that I needed to know. I know that I probably would have gotten one of those jobs had I still been employed or had just recently left, because they asked me a bunch of questions. I'm in IT and I do IT support for people. So there were a bunch of hypothetical scenario questions that I knew I should have known the answer, and I couldn't remember. But I found a spot that didn't ask me too many technical questions, and we're looking for somebody with a background very similar to mine. And I got hired after about a month of really serious searching, after about 3 or 4 months of just kind of casually looking for things that sounded interesting. I went back to work there at company number 1, we'll call them, and then realized that company number 1 didn't really hire me for the job that I thought that they were going to, and the job was similar but different. It was different enough that I was like, this is not where I want to be. I was actually getting recruited at that point for a couple of other different companies. So it basically turned into, once you get that first job when you're back, then people are like, oh, well, she actually is hireable. All right, we'll pursue her now. I got 3 or 4 different companies that were hounding me on LinkedIn to apply for their jobs, and made it to a couple of the final rounds for them. And then they decided that, we're looking for somebody who's similar to you, but not you. They were looking for a technical person with people skills, and I'm a people person with technical skills, which is similar but different. I found this other job, so I started at company number 2 after 6 months at company number 1. In DC, it's pretty common for people to job hop and only spend a couple of months at a job. Not a huge problem to have a short stint on my resume there. And then the more I understood what company number 2 was like, I realized that I really had trouble supporting their mission and didn't feel comfortable working for them as a company. It was kind of a toxic environment. While I was there, they announced that they were laying off. Well, they were rebadging 90% of their IT staff to contractors. People were just really upset. The atmosphere there was really gloomy and down in the dumps. People were leaving. And I was like, all right, it's not where I want to be. And then I also realized that DC was not where I wanted to be either. It was very expensive. Really, actually difficult to see the friends that you have in the area just because of how time consuming it can be to traverse across the city, which living in your area, you know the feeling.
Exactly.
I started looking to be back in the Midwest for a different job. My parents are getting older. I have a niece and a nephew that I want to be able to be around more. So I started looking for something in Minneapolis, in Des Moines, in St. Louis. Actually had somebody in the fire community reach out and say, hey, I have this job on my team, and I think you would actually be really good for it. Would you apply? I looked at the job and I said, that looks like a really good fit for me. And so I applied and I got it.
Oh, that is great. And, as you were talking, I was sitting here just taking a couple of notes. And one of the things that stood out to me was, and you can tell me if this is accurate or not, but it seems like kind of having the bravery to step out, give the whole freelancer lifestyle, try for a few months or for 8-9 months, and then going back into the workforce, did that make you a little more bold when it came to making decisions about your career going forward? Once you were back in the workforce now, would you feel more comfortable saying, this isn't a fit, let me find something that fits better?
I mean, it definitely takes that fear away. I know what it's like to walk away from a job. I was with my very first company for 5 years, and leaving that job was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I definitely cried on the way out the door because they had taken this chance on me fresh out of college and taught me everything I knew. And so it was really hard to walk away from that, but I survived. There are other companies worth working for out there. I knew what working for a good company was like. And so I was like, well, I want to find something like I had before. It's comforting to know that I was capable of looking for something that was the right fit.
What I'm really getting from hearing you speak and hearing more about your story is that this whole experience, this whole decision to kind of pursue FIRE and to really embrace this and really take control of your financial life has really had impacts that kind of spread beyond that into, the choices and where you make to live and the jobs that you may look into and different things like that, which have impacted your life in different ways that maybe it wouldn't have if you wouldn't have decided to give this a shot.
Yeah, 100%.
I think that's one of the things that I really enjoy about the movement is that it's challenging the norm. It's challenging the way you normally think about things, the way you normally would handle situations, and giving the opportunity to kind of take your life in your own hands and decide what you want to do and what's going to make you happy and what do you truly value versus what is everyone else telling you should be valuing.
Yes, exactly. I have the ability to say, no, this isn't for me and walk away. And there are a lot of people who can't do that because of how they have their existing financial life set up.
So for you, what does the future look like for you? Or what do you envision the future being now that you've gone through these experiences and you're kind of finding your way and figuring out what's going to work best for you? What do you hope for? What do you see for the future?
Well, I definitely don't want to retire at 35 anymore. It turns out that what I was looking for all along wasn't to not work entirely, but to find work that is fulfilling for me personally and also fills a need in the community, which I had in my first job and I have in this current job right now. This job offers a pension, which is pretty rare these days. If I stay until I'm 55, I'll be able to stay on their health insurance plan after I retire.
Which is huge.
So my retirement date looks more like 55 now than 35, which doesn't upset me at all, which is kind of weird. So now I'm just kind of taking a small step back and just kind of living more of not a normal lifestyle, because there's no such thing as normal, but standard American lifestyle. I'm still conscious about what I spend on and not going to debt or anything, living within my means, but I'm not 100% full bore on FIRE either. I'd like to think that I found a good balance where I can still save and put money away and have my nest egg grow in between now and then, and also enjoy my life and be able to do fun things without feeling guilt that I'm spending money that I otherwise could be hoarding.
Yeah, I love that. Balance is so important, but I think sometimes we forget it and maybe give it a backseat when it comes to prioritizing our lives and deciding what we're going to be doing, because you get to focus on one goal and one direction and you feel like you got to go all in, and there's no balance in that. And I think that's really cool to hear how for you've developed this new kind of perspective on life and finding a pace that's working for you and finding what it is that you're looking for out of life.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Gwen. I really appreciate you coming on, sharing, being so open with your story, really, and then sharing insights with all of us. For those of us who were not brave enough to make that leap and give this lifestyle a try, but we're always kind of curious about it. Thank you so much for kind of sharing and giving me an insight, and all the rest of us listening an insight into what that was like and your experience and your journey. So I really do appreciate that.
And I mean, that's the whole reason why I started the blog 5 years ago, is to share what I was going through. So those that were following along behind me could kind of live vicariously through my experiences and maybe not have to experience some of the consequences of the decisions that I made. I'm more than happy to share my story, and I'm very grateful that you had me on today.
Well, it was my pleasure having you on here to talk. And if people want to ask you questions and maybe kind of get to know you a little bit better, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
I'm probably most readily available to people through Instagram. My DMs are always open. Please don't be creepy. But I also have a contact form on my blog that gets sent to my email that I check pretty regularly. So that'd be a good way as well.
Perfect. I'll make sure we put that in the show notes so people can easily reach out to you, remember that information if they've already forgotten, like I am prone to do when I'm listening to podcasts. So thank you so much, Gwen. I really appreciate the time. And I'm really excited to hear what's going on with your life as, as time goes by and you continue to find happiness and joy in what's working for you.
I'll be around and sharing all about it.
Big thank you for joining us for the Plutus Awards podcast. We appreciate your taking some time out of your day to join us here. In next week's episode, we'll be joined by Shannon McLay, so make sure you're subscribed so that you can get that episode and more from the Plutus Awards podcast. You can learn more about our guests and the Plutus Awards podcast by visiting plutusawards.com/podcast and on Instagram @PlutusAwards. Once again, thanks for joining us, and remember to keep creating